All right. Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, I'm going to read the land acknowledgement, as well as the statement on slavery and its legacies at William and Mary. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherokee's, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. The statement on slavery and its legacies. The Board of Visitors acknowledges that William and Mary enslaved people, exploited them and their labor, and perpetuated the legacies of racial discrimination. The board profoundly regrets these activities, apologizes for them, expresses its deep appreciation for the contributions made by the African and African American members of its community to the vitality of William and Mary then, now, and for all time coming, and commits to continue our efforts to remedy the lingering effects of past injustices. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Juwan Johnson, the Mellon Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow with the Lemon Project, A Journey of Reconciliation. Tonight is we're continuing our Summer Sankofa Genealogy Workshop Series. And this is the last installment, last but definitely not least, of the three virtual workshops where we are retooling and diving deeper into our family history. Tonight's workshop is African American Newspapers in Genealogical Research. As many of you know, African American newspapers quickly became the voice of the community after emancipation. They were used in a variety of ways to inform, uplift, and unite the race north and south of the Mason-Dixon Line. Locating available resources is vital to the African American research process. And that's why tonight we have our friend and colleague, Mr. Tim Pinnick, joining us, who is a writer, national speaker, and author of the book, Finding and Using African American Newspapers. From 2006 to 2020, he taught as an associate instructor in the biennial course Researching African American Ancestors at the Institute of Genealogy and Historical Research. In 2019, and again this year, Tim was the coordinator and facilitator of a workshop course at the Institute entitled Building an African American Research Toolbox. He has taught as one of the inaugural instructors for the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute in 2013, and more recently has been part of the faculty for the Genealogical Research Institute of Pittsburgh, the Texas Institute of Genealogical Research, and the Genealogical Institute on Federal Records. He is a lover of history. He has presented papers at numerous history conferences, and over the years has served on the board of 3 genealogical organizations. Tim is the co-chair and lead researcher for the New Hanover County Community Remembrance Project, which partnered with the Equal Justice Institute to conduct a soil collection ceremony in November 2021 to honor the victims of the 1898 Wilmington Massacre and Coup. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Tim Pinnick, who will be presenting to us this evening. Let's give him a virtual applause as he comes to us this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. It's been great reconnecting with you. Yeah. I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciated getting a chance to see you in person not that very long ago at the National Genealogical Society conference. And I've been excited about coming to this program and presenting and sharing what I know, because I have quite a passion for newspapers. So without further ado, because Dr. Johnson said they start on time, they end on time. So I got a lot of slides. So let me go ahead and get to cracking and sharing hopefully what will be some meaningful information for those of you that have taken your time to join us this evening. I'd like to say your precious time, because our time is precious, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So we're going to talk about newspapers in genealogical research. It's so very important part of research. Not that long ago, it was more difficult to do this type of research because so much of it was not online, it was you had to go through microfilm and that type of stuff to access it. So it was a lot tougher to do things, but we're in a new day. So I had to start out, like, say, if I was in person, I mean, I like cracking jokes, so I can't crack as many jokes in the virtual format because I don't know who's laughing or not. But anyway, I got at least one to start off with that fits pretty appropriately. It's a vintage cartoon. I grew up watching the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote duel each other, but here they're together. They're sharing, and they're saying, we know newspapers can be entertaining, right? And they certainly can. The correspondents that were out there, and there were many, had really a sense of humor. And we see this from this Nashville Globe, January 6th, 1911, entry where it says, Uncle Albert Bell of Hortense, who is over 100 years old and is blind, has lived to see another new year, and he's still a sinner. He's still a sinner. So I don't know what you're doing at 100 years old for them to be calling you out for being a sinner, but I found that hilarious. And it's just one of many things that are going to make you laugh as you embark on a journey of newspaper research. Newspapers, really, they're so powerful. They often reveal new information, some of which can't be found elsewhere. They can be a source to confirm information found elsewhere. And of course, that's always important. We always want to find something that confirms something else. You want that second one that makes you feel real comfortable and saying, okay, yeah, that's probably legit now since we found the second source. Covers the lives of African Americans in a myriad of ways, and really unlike no other resource that's out there. Identifies and documents community activities and institutions. And I'm going to keep coming back to that. That is huge. That is really a key aspect that makes these newspapers so valuable to our research. And then we're going to talk about the power of African American newspapers specifically. They're an excellent source of migrations, both large and small. And if anybody's out there within the sound of my voice that's doing research right now, you definitely know your people were moving. They were going lots of different places, and it's pretty hard to keep track of when they left and when they got to different places, the intermediate stops and whatnot. Newspapers really help you with that. Oftentimes they do. They often provide details and clues not found in mainstream newspapers or other sources. The greatest asset, in my opinion, and I'll hedge sometimes and say probably, but really this is the sentence. I mean, it's the greatest asset, I think, is their community and social columns, which we'll be talking about. In many of these newspapers, which is unique to African American newspapers, is that they carry the news of African Americans in communities where a Black paper does not exist. So that's that power of these community social columns. Lots of people think, oh, we checked the newspapers in this small community in, central Alabama, and they really didn't have a Black newspaper, so we're not going to find out any information on the Black people that were in this community. It couldn't be further from the truth. These newspapers really did reach into communities large and small across the country in a really, really amazing way. So we're going to talk about understanding Black newspapers. I inserted this. I thought it was really important because Black newspapers are distinctly different. And so I wanted to play up or talk about that because I think it's important when you're researching to understand kind of what you're looking at and where they were kind of coming from in producing these papers. And so it's great that you guys that this is going to be recorded or is being recorded, because you'll be able to come back and pull this information out and use it. And I don't have to hesitate too long on the different slides. But this one is a really great one that I inserted. I've been doing this research for a long time, and this is an absolutely great article by a noted historian on Black newspapers, Emmylou Thornburg. And so many of you, if you're on college campuses or places where you can get access to JSTOR, you can find the article and download it. And I think if you read it, you'll find it beneficial. The business of Black newspapers. I'm giving you an example of another newspaper article that I found, and I can't see right now down low where I actually got this from. I'm sure it was probably out of JSTOR, but I can't see what the publication is right now. But I found this to be really revealing on what these papers were, what these major newspapers and editors were thinking and trying to do in trying to sell newspapers, right? And so it's called Breaking Down Buyer Resistance, Marketing the 1935 Pittsburgh Courier to Mississippi Blacks. And so, right, this is the essence. You think, here's the Pittsburgh Courier way up north, but yet they're concocting plans and strategies to try to court essentially Mississippi Blacks and get them to buy their newspaper. And again, that might seem counterintuitive to some people that aren't really familiar with newspaper research, but these big newspapers, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Philadelphia Tribune, Chicago Defender, Norfolk Journal and Guide, and several others, the big boys were really very strategic in trying to court different states and different Blacks in these various states, in large cities and small, through these social and community columns. And so let's take a look at what they were doing here. So here we're going to get a peek inside of a marketing campaign to increase subscribers, because it's all about getting enough subscribers that would pay the $1 or $1.50 or whatever it was for them to subscribe to the newspaper and to keep the newspaper going. A major theme was to provide a more personalized paper. And so here's their call to action. This is to the agents and reporters that are out there in the field all over America. This is what the Pittsburgh Courier was saying to them. It said, we must have more news that Mississippians want to read. That means news about themselves, their neighbors, their town and country, news about Mississippi. So we are going to start off with a Mississippi edition. It will contain all of the news about Mississippi that is worth printing. So prepare to send in news, real, not flattery or ballyhoo, news about your town and your county direct to the Courier each Saturday. Either write the news yourself or get someone else, get someone of enterprise and intellect to write it for you. Your increased sales will more than repay you for your effort. And this speaks volumes. I mean, when I'm reading this kind of stuff, right, you just read through, you can see lots of African Americans were not literate, but obviously you could be a newspaper agent or reporter and report the news. You just need somebody to record it for you or to write it down for you, that type of thing. And they must have had lots of people that were in that situation, because they're talking directly to them. But here, when you look at this, here's the Pittsburgh Courier, huge paper, and yet you see them talking about towns in Mississippi and saying personalized. So here's this big newspaper you think would be more of a kind of a, national, which it was, global even, and they are focusing in on getting the news of what's happening in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and these other places, which again, if you didn't understand the way Black newspapers operated, it'd be something that should be a surprise to you that they're behaving in that manner. And so they go on. They're talking about the concept that beauty sells newspapers. And so they're saying the eye is the mirror of the soul. The photograph is the mirror of the newspaper. We want and must have photographs of pretty women. As you well know, the Pittsburgh Courier is famous for its photographs of pretty women that it carries each week. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of pretty girls and women in your town, city, and county. We want the photographs of those pretty girls and women. Remember, whenever a photograph of a pretty girl or woman from your town, city, or county appears in a Pittsburgh Courier, that means more sales for you. It means a new friend that made the paper, made for the paper, and also means more money for you. Again, the bottom line is these guys making money, but they have these strategies. And if you've looked at Black newspapers, you do see lots of pictures. And in particular, according to the Courier, if you go through, obviously they focus on lots of women and putting them forefront, figuring that was something that was selling papers. And so this is just an example of one from the Courier. And I say you do see them all through the paper all the time. And here's one of their Louisville beauties. And it doesn't have to be, young unmarried women. They got misses like this particular young lady here throughout their papers. So this business of Black newspapers, again, to give you some insight into what they were going through and what they were trying to accomplish, they really struggled. They struggled financially because they had issues that white newspapers did not have. They had this fierce competition amongst each other. Again, you had these major newspapers all competing against each other for those readers. Shut out from the more lucrative advertising in the mainstream newspapers, because that's how newspapers normally generate a lot of their revenue, is from getting people to advertise in their newspapers. And of course, these mainstream newspapers in these large cities and small, there was no way for these papers to get those stores to, in many cases, to advertise in their paper. You know, they were spending their advertising dollars in the white mainstream papers, so they had to figure out other revenue streams. And it was hard to develop strategies that led to loyal readership and subscribers. You know, how do we distinguish ourselves? What can we do? What can we do that's unique, that will help us break through and get the lion's share of subscribers? And it wasn't an easy model to come up with. And so what we found is that the more successful ones, you know, use this expanded geographical approach, right? They figure we got to go outside of Pittsburgh, we got to go outside of Norfolk, got to go outside of Atlanta. We really got to expand our reach, and we need more circulation to stay afloat. And so this is what their strategy was. Almost all of them to a paper. They employed these correspondents and agents regionally, statewide, and also nationally, to send them all this different news. And so again, you see a unique paper, a national paper with plenty of local hometown news for hundreds of cities across cities and towns across America. And so what came basically in, what they settled on pretty much, were papers that expanded the use of local or community columns to cover cities and towns in their target markets. And they did this much more aggressively than mainstream newspapers. So if you look at those mainstream newspapers, the white papers, they'll have social columns, they'll have community columns, you know, local columns, but they didn't need that to survive. So you don't see it as much as you do in the Black newspapers. And again, when I started doing newspaper research and doing the research on Black newspapers, it was something I didn't know. I knew how the white newspapers operated, but then it was really interesting to see the dynamics and how Black newspapers actually operated, and how they had to operate in order to hopefully survive. So when talking about conducting Black newspaper research, and there's this barrier to newspaper research success that's out there, and I seen it almost from the beginning, people struggling to successfully do newspaper research. And really what it was, oops, I'm sorry about that last slide. It was this barrier to newspaper research success. It was information overload. You could easily find, especially once we went virtual, you could find so many lectures on newspapers. You know, people that felt confident that they had learned enough about newspapers, they wanted to share what they knew to their local societies, some of them, you know, to national societies, state societies, whatever. And so you had lots of them, and all of them, of course, weren't to the highest degree, and so they were varying degrees of value. So a lot of it out there. And this was the big thing, was the online databases. There was so many out there with the Genealogy Bank and newspapers.com and Newspapers Archive and the ProQuest historical Black newspapers, 19th century newspapers, and just on and on. It's like, you know, which ones could you access for free? Which ones did you have to pay for? And which ones did you have to seek out, like a ProQuest, which you can't get an individual subscription to. And so it wasn't just at the top level, it was from the very bottom, your local libraries. Some of them had really critical newspapers. They might just have the local edition, but something that maybe the big boys didn't even have. And so that's the only place maybe you could find those newspapers. But the gamut ran from your local libraries on up through those societies, up to those big commercial giants like Redex and ProQuest that had those monster collections. It's just mind-blowing, you know, thousands upon thousands of newspapers, and trying to figure out which ones were the ones you needed for your research. So, and then the last thing that was there is that these things were always shifting. ProQuest and the others they're always changing their business model, to try to make more money, to be honest with you. That's really their goal, is to be profitable. So they're always changing up, you know, what they have, their packages to various university libraries and that kind of stuff. And so it can get really confusing in that way too, trying to figure out what your, library, university library has as far as ProQuest. Do they have all of them? Do they just have, a couple of them? How many are there if you don't really know? So it can be very confusing. So with newspaper research, it just wasn't surprising me as I went from conference to conference, met people all the time, online, offline. That was kind of the most frequent and logical question that was asked by the genealogists, family historians, is which newspaper resource is best? Which one? Should I be investing money in a particular newspaper? I'm willing to do it, but, I don't know if that's going to be the one. I just don't know. Well, here's my solution. Here's my answer. This is the one I think really is the pathway to success. It's a dual pathway. I find it to be very efficient and effective, and it cuts down the weeds and gives you kind of a clear vision for how to do this necessary research. And the dual solution is something called the Ancestor Hunt, an online website by Kenneth Marks, which is fantastic, and partnered with the Chronicling America series that's hosted on the Library of Congress. Lots of you are probably more familiar with the latter than the former, but you need to use both of them to really be successful in trying to figure out and find information on your ancestors. So with Ancestor Hunt, you learn really what's available. Again, what newspapers are available out there for me to use, where they're available, at the state level, the county levels, where are these newspapers located, whether they're free or subscription based, right? I mentioned that before. That's highly important. It's very important to me to know whether I'm going to be asked to pay or not, because I say I'm pretty, my wife kind of calls me stingy, but that's really not true. I'm frugal. I'm frugal with my money. I know I'm going to have to pay for birth certificates or death certificates or Social Security applications or whatever. So I want to keep that money, available to do the things I know I have to do, and not pay for things that I could get, through other means. And so you learn how to become, this website really is great on teaching you how to become an efficient and effective user of newspaper sites, because Ken Marks does a lot of videos of how to do things using Boolean characters, and just everything you could think of, he talks about and demonstrates lots of different strategies and tips and whatever. So that's great, in addition to the newspaper links and things that he provides you with. Now, this is a disclaimer here, is that Ken started not that long ago. He started accepting ads. And so when you go to the website, it can be kind of confusing because you got stuff dropping down and popping up, when you got those things that really get very annoying. And so just be aware that that's going to be there, and be aware of what you click on and stuff. I mean, I don't know what's out there. Most of that stuff is most likely fine, but you don't want to click on that nonsense. You just want to get to what you want to get to. So just be careful when you navigate the first time. When you get through and you get to the links page in the other newspaper pages that are of interest to you, the best thing to do is just bookmark them. And then once you bookmark them, then you can come straight to those, and you're more familiar at that point, and you can continue to march. But just be a little careful in the beginning. Lots of people expressed a little bit of dismay, and they were not happy with Kenneth. But Kenneth has to make a living, and he provides a great product, and he needed to do that to monetize this, and I don't blame him one bit. And I hope other people understand as well. And so this is the kind of thing you can find there. This is just an example. One of the biggest areas is newspaper links, and he gives all these. He has them categorized and organized in various ways, and that's the greatness of the site. Is everything's organized for you to go through. So if you're looking for Kentucky, then all the Kentucky stuff is pretty much in one place, and you can even drill down to ethnicity, as this example shows you. And here's the African American newspaper links for Kentucky. And he's very thorough. He goes out there and hits all these different places. He's scraping stuff up from every area. And so he's got a pretty exhaustive list. Again, he's not perfect, but he has the majority of stuff that's out there. And this is an example. He does these online newspaper summaries by states. And I love this too, because this is the important part. This is the important section about this particular, this is what's important about this part. Look at there, it talks about subscription or pay sites. So he goes through, and now remember all those different ones I was talking about, where, you know, what are the free sites versus the paid sites. Here now, you know, he tells you, he breaks it down. So he tells you which are the paid sites. So he teaches you that. And then he not only does that, he tells you how many papers they have that are related to that particular state that you're researching at that particular time that you're looking at. So he tells you what ancestry.com has, and newspaper archive, and et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of get an idea of how much is even there to begin with. And many times you can go through and look at those newspapers on those sites and see what they have specifically without having to pay. In many cases, you can do that. So he breaks it down. So the opposite of that is, of course, that you can, when you scroll down, he goes to the non-paid stuff, to the stuff that you can access for free. This is something new. Again, he's continually evolving and just blowing my mind with the amount of information he has on the website. So he's expanded well beyond newspapers. Newspapers is what we're talking about today in the key, but I wanted to at least bring to your attention what you're going to find when you go out there. You're going to be very, very pleased, in my opinion. Because he has such a wide range of information for you. And this, again, this kind of stuff is really fantastic for researchers because it's a time saver. And so I just got done teaching a course on Toolkit, African American Toolkit, resource, building your African American Research Toolkit. So I really know the value of trying to bring all that information together in one place. And so as you can see here, this is just an example of one, you know, District of Columbia. Here's all their free online genealogy in the toolkit. And when you look through here, some of you guys that are seasoned researchers, you'll see and recognize a lot of these different links to these different websites. You'll recognize them. These are big websites, big and small, but lots of ones that are recognizable. So again, he went out there and found which sites have information on the District of Columbia, and puts the links in. So when you click on it, it takes you to that information. It doesn't get much better than that. So this is just fantastic. When I came across this and saw it, I was like, oh, I thought I loved this site before, but even more so now. I don't know how he sleeps, to be honest with you. And so this is just scrolling down that page. And again, you can just see the different things. Off to the left, David Rumsey's historical maps that Jamel Jordan and other experts in research talk about all the time. You know, he takes you directly to there, to the DC maps. Cindy's list over there, a lot of people are familiar with. One of my favorite places to go and to visit online and offline is Allen County Public Library. Terrific place. And so he gives you all the links right into their stuff. And then the important places that people kind of dismiss or forget about, like Roots Web. People keep reminding, I keep hearing people saying Roots Web really has really good stuff that's unique, because there was a lot of work that was done several years ago, maybe a decade or more ago, but it really, that stuff that's there, people that shared information and whatnot, is really, really valuable, and people kind of forget about it. So he really just, he does a very, very thorough job, very, very impressive. So the ancestor hunt. So when you go out there, you'll see something like this. You actually see a short video that's a little over a minute, where he kind of gives you the overview of all these different assets and resources that he has, you know, beyond newspapers and stuff. So he gives you an idea of exactly what you're about to get into as far as your journey of discovery. So moving on to the Library of Congress, where Chronicling America is. Chronicling America really is an amazing site too. It's really this massive newspaper title directory, list of all these different newspapers that are available for you. And here, you learn what's available. Here, now you're learning what's available in print or microfilm, right? Because with Ken Marx's site, the Ancestor Hunt, he's pulling all the online stuff. And so now here you're getting the other piece. There's more stuff offline than online. And so they're showing you what's available in print or microfilm. And again, where that material is, which depositories across the country have those particular newspapers that are listed. And then in addition to that, they do have some online resources there. Lots of it, really. It's just growing and growing. Each year, they add more and more through the National Endowment of the Humanities, I believe, is the one that gives grants every year to different entities to digitize hundreds of thousands of newspaper pages and add to Chronicling America on a yearly basis. So it's only going to get better and better as you go back. You don't find something that you're interested in go back that next year and look and see if it's been added. And so this is what the first page kind of looks like here. You can see there's two places, one for the digitized papers and then one for the newspaper directory. And you can see the numbers. I mean, they're over topping 20 million pages of digitized papers. And it's like this, it's growing and growing with each cycle of NEH grants. And then you can see the title list of newspapers is topping 150,000. So it's quite a robust site and quite a valuable site for researchers. And then the one thing that I was very, very pleased when I first went out there long time ago, they had this kind of from the beginning, is that the way you can select newspapers, you can select in so many different ways. And one of them is you can specify ethnicity. And so you can see here, you can go in there, and if you're just looking for African American newspapers, you can just select that, and then that's all it'll return to you. But as I said a minute ago, offline collections are essential to research. You're not real smart if you just live in the online world, just like genealogy in general. You just can't find everything you need to find and be as efficient and find your people or help people find their people if you're just doing everything online. You have to get offline. And so majority of the papers are not on the web, and you just can't count on them being there for a long time. It's just too much stuff and not enough people that are or entities that are digitizing that. And so university, public libraries, state historical societies, and genealogical societies is where you're going to find the bulk of the offline collections. And all of you should be doing, I'm not giving anybody a pass. Everybody should be doing interlibrary loan or learning about what it is and then start to do it. You need to get your library card from your local library. And then from there, you can, you usually need that to place interlibrary loan requests and put them out there. And this is the way to get those newspapers that are in repositories, in those repositories I just mentioned a second ago on that last slide. In order to get access to a lot of those, your local library probably will not have a majority of them, especially if you're up in New York and you're researching Alabama. They need to go down and request that from some library in Alabama or a major university library that might have those Alabama papers, and you need to request them and have them shipped to your particular library and read them on a microfilm. And so here's printed finding aids. Again, we're offline now. These are three really important collections that you should know, or books that you should know about that will help you offline when you're trying to find these newspapers. First one, and I got to say it's my favorite. I like them all. It's like my children. I love them all. But this was a game changer when it came out. And this is African American Newspapers and Periodicals by Danke and Haiti. It's a bibliography of thousands of newspapers, all in alphabetical order, over 6,500 of them. Gives the names of the repositories and the issues that are available chronologically as far as dates. Has a geographical index if you're really interested, like say in a specific state, Mississippi, Arkansas, whatever. Another way to, and it just gives you another way to ascertain and verify African American newspaper titles, because all African American newspapers don't say African American this or Black that. Which ones that you're looking for in the area that you're looking. How do you identify those African American papers, right? They might be called the Recorder, or the Guardian or something like that. And so this is a great way to find out what the titles are in the areas, the papers that you're looking at in geographic areas. This is really a neat book too. And it's very, very powerful. Extant collections of early Black newspapers, Research Guide to the Black Press, 1880 to 1915, with an index. Very rarely do you find indexes. And it's to the Boston Guardian for 1902 to 1904. What's really special, this book's got a lot of good things about it, but the special thing, again, I'm coming back to those social columns, right? When you're searching through, now that you're online and you're doing those searches and you're doing specific word searches, finding things and whatever. This gives you a real good, if you got people that are on the East Coast particularly, she goes through and just, Georgia Mary Campbell, she goes through and just gives you all of these different, I call it nicknames or place names for these different cities that most of us would have no clue even existed. And so as you look down, it's like this little sample list, but lots of them are like the one at the very bottom that I'm pointing to. You're going to find throughout that list lots of ones like this, where an example is Syracuse there. If you're looking for people in Syracuse, when you're doing those searches on newspapers, in the Pittsburgh Courier or wherever it is, you're putting in Syracuse and search for Syracuse, figuring that's the column, that's the name of the city, that's the name of the social column. But you can see here, they had a nickname called Salt Sea Echoes. And so if you didn't know that, you never would have searched on that. And so this is great because it gives you all of these other alternative spellings, so to speak, so that you can search on those too, and then bring up those columns that are germane to your research. The last one is Barbara Henrush's book, Bibliographic Checklist of African American Newspapers. This one has over 5,500 entries and over 100 sources, from over 100 sources. And this is a checklist, and it varies from a union list. And the biggest variation, or the biggest thing to remember, is that what you find in this book, if you see something in this book and you get excited about it, there may not be a copy that you can go interlibrary loan. There may not be an extant copy available. She went through, and if a newspaper, for example, that she was looking at talked about another newspaper, then she recorded that, and that's in the book. But that name of that newspaper that was in the other newspaper may not have any copies that survive, right? And so that's the really distinctive difference between what you're going to see in this book versus in the first book with James Danke in Haiti. Everything in there, every entry in there is something that they were able to put their eyes on and verify existed. So you'll be able to get copies of those. Okay, definitely an important distinction to make. And so then again, when you're doing this, you just never know where you're going to find the information. And sometimes one will, using one and then the other in combination really gives you the answer you're looking for. So I highly recommend that everything I've talked about, now that you know about them, get familiar with them all and use them, because each one, will have their specific strengths and weaknesses depending on what you're looking for and where you're looking for it. Okay, so I've kind of led up to this about the Black newspaper research, saying that the priority focus for researchers, it is the social community columns for your cities and towns of interest. Yes, you can go out and you're going to look for obituaries, and you're going to have a specific thing where you heard some rumor about something, you're trying to confirm that something happened in a specific town. Yes, you're going to do those targeted searches, but the most bang for your buck, the most success you're going to have, is because of the way these newspapers were constructed, like I showed you earlier. Tons and tons of these social community columns that you can really, really benefit from. And so again, I'm probably the most valuable aspect of Black newspaper research. I really believe it is the most valuable aspect, because they allow us to reach into these communities beyond the town where that newspaper is being published. Okay, published in Pittsburgh, but they're talking about Anniston, Alabama, right, in that newspaper. So it's just absolutely fantastic. And so here's a place where the bulk of the community social columns that we'll probably find, if you're looking for little tiny podunk towns or whatever, that you think, oh, it's only got, several hundred Blacks that even were there, 110 or whatever, they probably won't have. This is where, if you're going to find community and social columns on those ones, it's usually through these major newspapers that are part of the Black newspaper collection from ProQuest. And ProQuest is hard to find, and so you're going to have to do some homework, and it's usually on university library campuses, because it's very, very expensive. And so you're going to have to find a place and make it a point to find those places, and then to mine this information and to do those searches. So plan your trip, what you want to be looking for, or whatever, and just have a bunch of things to go to search for once you find a location that has, most or all of these newspapers, because it really is a tremendous resource. But you're not gonna find it in most public libraries, just the major ones, and even there they won't have all of these in most cases. And so this is just an example. Here's the Chicago Defender, 1933, and look at this, the Kentucky State News, right? And you can see how many columns. I mean, dozens of cities and towns throughout Kentucky, large and small, that are represented there. So it's not the exception to the rule. It is the rule. It's tons of stuff. And I was thrilled. I just found out, I was looking on the site about 30 days or so ago, preparing for my my toolbox course, and I saw that I knew they were saying they were going to add the Louisville Defender, and I was looking forward to that because it's a great paper. But then they surprised me, and so they also added the Kansas City Call, and that's a really big run there. And so again, when you think, and I shouldn't over talk too much because I want to try to keep on schedule, but the Kansas City Call, when you think about the Jayhawkers, when you think about the Exodusters and people that came from, North Carolina and other places in the Deep South up into Kansas at a certain point in time, this paper can be very, very valuable to you, right? Because their descendants were there. And so that's where you will find a lot of them mentioned in the Kansas City newspaper. And trust me when I say it, I'm sure that paper is going to cover Oklahoma and some of the adjoining states and whatever. And like I say 1919 to 2010, that's a great run. So we're going to look at a quick illustration of communities columns and how basically illustrating their value and try to show you through an example. So we're going to use a place called Champaign, Illinois, which most people probably don't even know about unless you're like maybe a Big Ten fan or whatever, or sports fan, and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is there. That's where it's located. So I was doing an early 20th century project, and I was gathering information on the African American community in Champaign, Illinois. And so here's a snapshot kind of what their population was like over several decades. And so you can see how it grew. I mean, not a bad number, 404 to begin with, but within 30-year period, I mean, it more than tripled, almost quadrupled to nearly 1,600 people. And so it was a pretty sizable population there during the time period that I was looking for individuals and looking to build out that community. And so I started, with the search using Chronicling America. This was back before the ancestor hunt, actually. So I started with Chronicling America. And so I searched for Illinois, and then here's my results. I got 154 papers that were found and cataloged, and that's a pretty decent number for Illinois papers. But right, I got to drill down. I'm looking not just for Illinois, I'm looking for a specific city within Illinois. So then I drilled down and said, okay, let's look for Champaign County, Illinois. What do we have there as far as results? And then now dropped drastically, right? 9 Black newspapers had been found in catalog. But to my dismay, none of those really covered the period of early 1900s that I was looking for and researching in. So that was kind of a bust. So what is a young researcher to do? Went to the big 3, right? Went to the ones that I went offline and to see if there was something there. Nothing was there that was significant. That was really helpful. And so, but what did I do? I used these community columns, these social columns, and here's my results from there. Here's some of my results, most of them. And I found Champaign columns. In the Chicago Defender, Chicago Whip, the state capitol, which is the Illinois state capitol, Springfield, the Illinois Record, and in a wonderful paper called the Freeman, which is the Indianapolis Freeman. And so as you can see the periods that were being covered there, you get nice overlap. So this was great for me. I was able to cover and do the research in that particular area, and it was totally due to using social columns because there were just no papers that were directly tied to that city that were extant or existed for me to use. So hopefully you can see through that example the power of these social columns and why I'm kind of pressing and pushing and saying this is really the way to success in many, many cases. And so here's a social column resource of note that I definitely wanted to get in there. This is a woman that's extraordinary. Her name is Marlene Branson. She's a longtime member of the Afro-American Historical Genealogical Society. And she's publishing, I don't know if she finished even. I don't know when she even knows how to say stop, but she's publishing this amazing series of books called Early African American Deaths in the Pittsburgh Courier, right? Pittsburgh Courier, great top of the line paper. That's a ProQuest paper. She's got 15 volumes that I know of right now that are available through Clausen Press. And she transcribes the deaths from those newspapers, many of them in newspaper community columns from different places. And so, and due to that nationwide circulation of the Courier, a lot of those entries in the volume cover a majority of the states in dozens and dozens of cities. And so here's an example here. We go out to the Clausen Press site, and you can see some of the 15 volumes that she has available for sale out there. And then here's just a close-up example, just looking at one of them. Here's book 6 that covers 1928, the year 1928, it looks like here. And in just that 1 year, in that one book, I mean, she transcribed over 1,000 deaths are in that book in over 30 states. Okay, so it ain't all about Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh. And you can see right there all the list she gives you. So you can go onto the website and see all the different communities that were featured in that particular volume. And I'm looking here now, I can see Georgia figuring quite broadly there in that. And so this is really something that's great for public libraries. I think you should be advocating and trying to get your libraries, now that you know the value, you can go and put in a request for certain, most libraries let you put in requests for materials and stuff. And so put in a request, but kind of don't just put in a request, kind of explain why it's important, to the African American community doing research, at that library, to have books like this, in their collection. So help her, reward her for Marlene, for all of that hard work. And then again, it's a win-win situation when you have this great resource in your library. So I'm finding, I've been doing this for so long, there's like newspaper niches out there, right? Little things. When you examine, no newspaper is completely alike, and they all kind of gravitate and have their own little things that kind of set them apart from others. And so here's a couple. I think I have a couple here. One is, this is neat. The Chicago Defender, they grabbed onto this thing where they started publishing the children's, and not the children's greatest newspaper, because they hit on this thing called the Bud Billiken Club, and they created this fictional character called Bud Billiken. And so kids went crazy over that. And so they were sending in from all over the country and overseas, trying to be good Bud Billiken, members. And so they joined the Bud Billiken Club. And so trust me, they're everywhere. It's just amazing when you see this. And this is the early 1900s, like in the 20s, I think it might have started, maybe the 30s, late 20s. And so here's an example. Here's a Chicago paper, and here's the Philadelphia connection I pulled out. So here's Bud over there, Bud Billiken, and he's always given good. Bud says this, Bud says that. But here's the list of 1923. In this issue, they're listing some of the new members that come on board in 1923. And you can see I blew up one person, Anna Waters. She was 12 years old, and they give her address. So again, that's the great genealogical rich value of this, is when you're tracing people and it's hard to find people, you're not finding them in the census or whatever, this is another resource to go in there to try to find, maybe some adults and stuff through their children, type of strategy. And so here, when I did that was 1923, and we go 3 years backwards, and here's Anna Waters, 3 years removed. She's 9 years old. And she's not in the household with her parents. And this is even better for me as a researcher. You're getting that grandparent here in this particular situation, or grandparents, because here she is sitting as their granddaughter in this particular situation. So now you've got another kind of research avenue. Okay, why is she not with her parents? What's going on? And again, trying to figure out those types of things. There's always something to try to figure out when you're doing genealogy. And so here's just another example. Here's the Baltimore Afro-American from 1928. And it's one of about 3 papers I've discovered that has specific columns for Pullman porters, railroad porters. They were so big and prominent in that time period that they got their own columns. And so if you got Pullman porters, it's a way to find valuable information out, hopefully, about the porters. And so here's something called Lost Ads. Again, something that's really unique to African Americans. This book by Heather Andrea Williams is outstanding. I love it. It's called Help Me to Find My People. And she basically focuses on African Americans that put ads, lost ads in newspapers to try to find and reunite with their families. And so it's all about the pursuit of family and loved ones. And so with many African Americans, once they were free, they became free, they traveled. They set foot right away to try to find people that were sold or ran away, escaped or whatever. And so they were trying to reunite families. And so many times they were putting these ads in papers. Some of them had success with these papers. Many others, they did not, but they kept trying. They kept putting these ads in papers. And the Indianapolis Freeman is an example of a paper. I'm almost positive when I say this, that they were one of the ones, and most of them did it too, that these kind of ads, they ran for free. They didn't charge people for these ads, which is wonderful. Again, Black newspapers were so impactful back in the day and even today, but they just really were quite a service to the community. And Black newspapers were full of those ads seeking reunification in all sorts of circumstances. So we're gonna look at a quick example of that. Here's something, it was the front page of the Cleveland Gazette in 1883. And she says, they say, please copy many times in order for other churches, places to copy if it looks familiar for that area or something that they see in the ad. So I'm going to read through this one. It's to the editor of the Gazette. And it says, I wish to give your readers, your many readers, a little sketch of my line. In 1865 or 66, I was separated from my mother, father, sisters, and brother in Cincinnati. And although I had made nearly all inquiries possible, not been able to find any of them as yet. Father's name is Melvin Sutherland, mother Millie Sutherland, sisters Anna Sutherland, Amanda Jane Sutherland, Lucy Frances Sutherland, youngest sister, remember that, Rhoda and Lincoln Sutherland, and my only brother, Alec Franklin Sutherland. Any information will be gladly received. And then she gives her PO box, and she's in Geneva, Ohio. Her name's Caroline Sutherland, who put this ad in the paper. So of course they don't have the benefit of, the hindsight that we have 2020. So I was able to start looking for her. So I looked for her and I did find her. I found her. Here she is at age 17 now, and this is 1870. So you track down. So now we get a good idea of what her age was. We can find out anything like that in the ad. She's with a white family, and she's in Lake County, Ohio, and she's going to school there. So again, who is this white family? How did she end up with them? The mysteries that need to be answered and solved. And here in Franklin County, I found their family. And I think, let me push again. Yeah, here we go. And so here's most of the family. You got the father, Melvin, sister, Lucy, the only brother, Alec, the youngest daughter, Rhoda, that she mentioned. Now you got another daughter, though, or another sibling for her, Susan. But when you look at that age, she was born circa, 1866. So probably when she got separated, by the time she was separated, her mother probably was pregnant, right? It would stand to reason when you do the math that she probably was pregnant at that particular time. But here, map, you can see Franklin County there in the center of the state and Lake County way up at the top. And so Caroline and her family were that far apart. And they traveled from the bottom edge where you see the Ohio, that's the Ohio River down at the very bottom. Cincinnati's down there. So one made it about halfway up the state. The other one, Caroline, all the way up to the top of the state. But I never found her after her 1883 query. I didn't do a hard, diligent search, but I did look for her on Ancestry and a couple other places, but I didn't look like in city directories in Geneva and that kind of stuff. But anyway, I never found her after 1883, but I did find her brother, Alec, and two of her sisters when I was doing my research. And they were, like I said, they were in that Columbus area. And then I think they might've been in a couple other areas as well. So to wrap this up here, I think this is our last piece here. Conducting effective newspaper research means conducting overall newspaper research, which means even though the purpose here was not to talk about mainstream newspapers, you absolutely must include mainstream newspapers in your research. You cannot neglect them. They're essential to Black newspaper or the Black research. They often provide details and clues that you will not find in a Black newspaper. Lots of times they have these lengthy obituaries for their respected citizens, that type of stuff, and these huge ones that oftentimes give the name of the slaveholder. They'll vary widely in coverage of African American activities, so you have to be patient and diligent when you go through them. And I have strategies in my book on how to do that. Many carry news of African American newspapers in segregated columns. They wanted to try to get the Black business, so they started putting segregated columns, colored people's news and all that kind of stuff in their newspapers to try to attract Black readers. And then what they really do is they complement the news in Black papers, and they need to be used in tandem. You need to use them both. So thank you very much for your time investment. Again, I know you could have been doing many other things, probably watching stuff on TV, which you probably was a good thing you came to hear me today, because TV has a lot of noise on there. But anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time. Here's my contact information. It's also, hopefully they'll put that in the chat, but you'll be able to listen to this over and over again, and you'll be able to lift it off of here. And so feel free to contact me if you have questions in your as you're trying to navigate the world of newspapers. I will help you if I can, and dispense some advice almost all the time for free, folks, for free. So with that, I'll stop to share and turn it back over to our hosts.
Thank you so much, Tim, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for your generosity in offering to assist those who are attending as well. We have a few questions, and we have about 5 minutes here. The first was, someone wanted to know, will there be a handout for this presentation? I don't think you submitted a handout. However, again, you can watch this presentation over and over on our YouTube channel, which should be available next week. There was also another question about your building African American toolkit recording. Someone wanted to know if that was available.
No, that was a week-long course that I conducted for the Institute of Genealogy and Historical Research. But I do a toolbox talk, which again is very abbreviated. And so I've done that several times, but I don't think it's been recorded anywhere though.
Okay. Now this is a question, says, do you know if African American newspapers and periodicals source include publications from historically Black colleges and universities?
I'm going to venture out there and say yes. I would think that that the book by in particular the book by Danke, the first one, the black one with over 6,600 entries. It read, I think, African American newspapers and periodicals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in there you will probably find, I'm sure, I feel very confident you will find lots of information there about African American periodicals. And also when you go to the ancestor hunt, that dude, again, he's just flat out, he's a bad dude. And so when you go there, you'll probably find some things that are probably even be maybe categorized. Mm-hmm. But if not, reach out to him and ask him about that if you're really interested in that, and find out what he has to say. Very knowledgeable young individual.
Okay, great. And I see Don has placed Tim's email address in the chat. Are there any other questions anyone would like to place in the chat while we have Tim with us for a couple of minutes?
I'm gonna give a quick shout out. I think I saw briefly, like I saw my cousin from the West Coast, Maisha.
Okay.
Hey, Maisha, love you, girl. Thanks for showing up.
Okay. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to continue this fall with our Genealogy Research Roundtable, which is an informal meeting for those who want to join in the genealogical research community with us that we have online here with the Lemon Project. Meets every month. You can actually follow Lemon Project, either our social media platforms or also our website. It has those dates whereby you can register. Again, I don't think we have any further questions, but thank you so much for joining us. Again, let's give Tim a virtual applause. And again, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, always insightful. And stay tuned for our upcoming programs this fall. And thank you so much for your support over this summer. For those who have joined us for all 3 installments, we ended on a high note, as we always do. And so again, thank you for joining us, and follow us on our social media platforms for our future programs. Have a good evening.